no dieron los
I
datos
wish I
también
knew.
que
No,
estamos
Dieguito. Hola, ¿cómo estás, Diego? ¿Cómo estás, amigo?
That's not the actual poll. That's the
Javier.
YouTube poll.
Hola, Jessica. Qué hermosa risa que tenés.
Yeah, that's the YouTube poll.
Hola, Javi.
Tabula rasa, Jessica. Tabula rasa. Sí. Bueno,
Bueno,
qué tensión que flota en el ambiente,
O sea,
¿no?
no
El,
puedo
el estudio se corta con una motosierra, ¿no?
no, uno pensaba, todo
Relajen.
empezó como un gran chiste en estudios de
No,
televisión con un señor
Sí,
que
una joda y
venía.
quedó.
Y la joda
The problem is that the dude
Digamos, se puede
Milei
ganar o
is
perder,
like
pero no
a
hay nada más
Reddit
liberador que el
populist.
sufragio popular y
you
no
know,
pienso
so
hacer ningún
he's
pronóstico,
super
pero solo decirles que no fue muy bien en
online.
Australia, Indonesia
So,
y de la mano del gran Kikuchi parece que
it's
arrasamos en Japón.
The silent majority are actually
Todo el conurbano de Tokio se movilizó a favor de las
moderates.
ideas de la libertad.
The reasonable
Arigato.
people.
Bien, está muy bien.
Estamos
Bueno,
It's a
¿qué
pretty
tendremos?
bad,
¿Un Milei más próximo al poder y más sosegado, suavizado?
It's a pretty bad situation because you have to kind of
vuelve la
cheer for the
motosierra,
status quo
Digamos,
liberal in
o
this
sea,
sense.
yo soy bilardista y aunque
It's
le
like
moleste
50-50.
mucho a la casta cultural, la
It's
democracia
legitimately
somos
50-50.
todos,
Like the
o
polls,
todes, digamos, o sea.
it's absurd.
Fiscalas, dijo
If you look,
Di Tulio.
it's
Bueno,
classic
después la vamos a seguir.
social
Gracias,
liberal,
Milei,
liberal
Gracias. Al
democracy.
Colón, al Colón. ¡Viva la libertad, carajo!
Nos vamos con Paulita, allí afuera de Milei. Acá estamos, la verdad es que
So you
es
look-
más y más la cantidad de gente que va llegando. Por supuesto que las caras que están en la valla no van.
When Milei lost, he came second in the first round, and then look how the polls flipped to put him ahead. It's one of those things where as soon as it becomes a one-on-one, all of the opposition money is going to come in behind who is the more capitalist, right? So it will be a miracle if Milei doesn't win, which I think he's going to. It will be a miracle if he doesn't. I'm not, and it also isn't a miracle if he loses because Massa is just literally like a status quo, Trudeau-esque type liberal, like kind of on the left, but not really. So this is a bleak one.
Más gente. ¿Cuántos años tenés?
The problem is they can't
25 años. ¿Con quién
because
viniste?
they have somewhat of a
Con tu
legitimate
novia también de
democracy,
25, más o
unlike
menos.
us
26.
in either
Fueron a votar
country
temprano y se
here in
vinieron
North
acá. ¿A qué hora
America.
llegaron?
Somos uruguayos.
They
¿No
have
votaron?
they can't
No votaron. ¿Y por
put
qué están acá?
out the results
venimos a
if there's
apoyar.
people still in
Apoyar.
line.
Mucha gente que no votó, pero sin embargo
So
viene a
it's
apoyar.
still
Mira,
sitting at
Chicho,
zeros
subite ahí, vas
because
a ver la
there's
cantidad
people
de
still
gente.
in
¿Cómo le
line.
va?
Hola,
¿Cómo anda?
¿todo bien?
Vamos a tratar también
So,
de pasar del otro
yeah,
lado,
it's an interesting
porque
situation.
les digo que es una fiesta cuando uno pasa este
Like essentially, Milei is literally like a libertarian, neo-libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, and he might become the president of the country now. And I think, I don't think this will be a good thing for people of Argentina. Like, there's a very clear example of something similar that happened in South America. There's been for a long time, the Argentina has been dominated by the Liberal Party, and people are tired of it. Very similar dynamic to Canada. Like a long time of under one party, and people see very similar aspect in seeing Pierre Poilievre as a way out. They see Milei as a way out, just as something different, something radically different. And the one thing that they haven't tried is Reddit libertarianism. And what's crazy too is like Argentina is in BRICS, so like it's crazy because like considering like Argentina is like such a massive well, that's the thing. I'll get into that. I don't think about the way that that succession goes though. Like if Trump wins, the blowback of Trump winning in Canada will make Trudeau likely to win again. because there will be so many moderates who will be on the center who won't want to support Trudeau. But then if Trump comes into power, the threat of more conservatives, the threat that's... I don't know. I'm not sure about Trump winning either, but I honestly don't know. I've talked about this many times. Trudeau has lost the popular vote in the last 2 elections and still won. The polls are not accurate. They trump up the polls to make people think that the Liberals are going to lose, because that gets people out to vote. And I would be very skeptical of 538 or whatever, those people who put out the polls in Canada. I really don't trust that. I think that the Liberals are fucking savvy, man, and I honestly think that I can see Poilievre winning if Biden or a Democrat stays in power. I can totally see that happening. But if Trump wins, no, Trudeau will stay in power. I'm positive, because the blowback will either make people left of center vote Liberal to keep the conservatives out of power, or it will keep the fence people to go to slightly to the left to vote Liberal to keep the conservatives out of power. And yeah, I mean, the only reason I'm like banging my fist on this is because I've talked about this a bunch, where it's like I don't know, it's this classic like underdog story where they love to make it seem like they're gonna lose and then do the thing. Lula did the same thing. Lula literally went to prison and then changed, and that's how he's gotten this huge support. Obviously Lula is not fucking Trudeau, but I just mean they look at that type of, how can we make populism work left of center, and they do this by externalizing these awful things and then pretending like they're gonna give like people a little bit of concessions. And I don't know, that's Canada. But as far as like what's happening here in Argentina, very similar story, because like Argentina is a massively inflation country, similar to Canada, but being in BRICS, that isn't going to help. And then also, Milei wants to literally get off the peso, and he wants to use the American dollar as the Argentina currency, which is like, that's the exact opposite of what BRICS is trying to do. So like he is gonna go like completely against the pact that like the counter development, counter hegemony in the world is trying to build, and I don't think it's gonna work. And because like I'll get to it, but there's a clear example of this with in Brazil. What led to Bolsonaro coming into power, and they had a chance, and look what happened. And it's very simple, and it's that libertarianism doesn't work. While it sounds good in theory, it often doesn't work, because similar to socialism in the current economic system, corruption is way too obvious, way too much of a prevalent thing, and it's the same for libertarianism. Yeah, I mean that's absurd. Yeah, and the thing about the talking about the Bitcoin thing is like they're saying that, well, it's completely schizophrenic, because like the government is literally trying to get Canada off of Bitcoin completely, so that Canadians cannot trade Bitcoin. It's it's hard. It's much harder than it was like during the pandemic to buy and sell Bitcoin without it being traced in this country. Yeah, and the thing is too, like, it's just so absurd. Like, think about exactly what they're talking about. Like, this idea, the market and the state are these two completely separate entities. That's a delusion. Like, they're interconnected, and there's certain functions that are best handled by government because then that way they can be done efficiently, and privatization just leads to things being done less efficiently so that more profit can be made. And all you end up having is the things that government did for less money being done by private companies where no democracy looks over anything because it's all privatized, and it costs more and it's less efficient. And we say that like that's smaller government. That's the people who are, when there's a snowstorm on the highway and the highways aren't plowed, and instead of it being like, the Ontario, plows or whoever, it's some contractor who's just not doing it because they don't need to. They're getting the money. Why would they? Right? It's not like they have citizens that are that they have to answer to, right? Like it's all private now. And that's a very small example of like neoliberal privatization, like this neo-libertarianism that we're headed towards. And it's a fantasy because they think that they're replacing government with the market, but really what they're doing is they're just creating a different type of government that generates profit. They're literally profitizing the infrastructure of government, like the mode of government. And again, we've seen this happen. It happened in Argentina, or it happened in Brazil. The very same type of situation too, where it was like a youth movement being tricked into thinking that this is like populism towards the left of center when it's not. And it's the same thing as like socialism, where it's like, and I say this as someone who is a socialist, socialism in the current framework of reality of how our economic system works won't work because the powerful will be corrupt. That's how it works. If they're not actually beholden to people that like in where democracy is actually protected by the state, like in China, in Cuba, where democracy is actually held by the state and isn't just like open for business, that's when there actually is like, self accountability. But otherwise we see like that, the thing that I showed you about the polls, where it's like as soon as money gets into the equation, it puts it towards whatever leader is going to make it so that the most profit can be made and the highest amount of exploitation could be carried out. Brazil got lucky because it ended up being this thing where it was like Bolsonaro was becoming such a liability to the system that a little bit of the concessions towards the Brazilian public was actually a good thing to take the foot off the gas of the maniacal fascist, right? And that's the thing, is like, it's very much the same idea where like libertarianism is not, this idea that it operates with this idea of like a small government. It's purely idealist and it's utopian, just like many other political ideologies. Like it seeks to break away from something that it's completely theoretical, and it's just that it's this idea of not being able to deal with or just like cope with modernity. And again, much like other political ideologies, much like socialism and communism, and it's this thing that's like it's trying to encapsulate modern society as it develops, but it can't, because those ideas from the early capitalist era, Ayn Rand and all that nonsense being applied now would lead us to complete decay, and we're headed there. And that's that libertarian vision of government. It aims for this utopia where like individual liberty reigns supreme, but that overlooks the complexities of real world government. Like there is that this is the thing too, is it can only go so far before there is a large blowback, like what we saw in Brazil, where their economy tanked and they had a reactionary blowback that led to Lula. And that's that liberal vision on this, is like this idea of using capitalism to create a more equitable society, not necessarily taking capitalism away, but using capitalism to make it so that we develop the lesser developed nations, and that's where that, instead of getting rid of the bourgeois, we bring the bourgeois to the overexploited world so that they can then become bourgeois. And that's very much what literally, like what Lula said, his literal words of we should be able to consume what we produce. And that, it's this idea of individualism and consumerism at the same time. And you find people that they're trying to get free or whatever, but really they're just trying to get meaning in their life and more control in their life through material advancement and being able to consume more and have financial security. It's not necessarily like community driven. It is all based on oneself, right? How we can pick ourselves up ourselves, not, away from this social welfare idea and more towards giving more opportunity for workers to advance themselves, which is, again, it's like bringing Reaganism to Central America, to the global South. But that's the thing, is this mindset is literally just like always in a fight, in a struggle with itself, and it's this. That's why we see this pursuit of Bernie bro socialism, or Milei Reddit libertarianism, and that's the battle of the middle class bourgeoisie. That's constantly, it's the everybody should just be able to fend for themselves, and we shouldn't have the market having to pay taxes to bring up other people. If they can't fend for themselves, fuck them. And then the opposite is, we should raise up everybody, and Medicare and health insurance, and tuition should be free, and all those things. Those are coming from the same class. Those two different people coming from the same class. And this is a conflict that comes out of this never-ending pursuit of pleasure, while also trying to avoid having to face the fact that we are the cause of so much pain throughout the world. So we want to have the pleasure of having a social project, while also ignoring that all of the issues that we cause on Earth, which is not a thing that we can do. It's happened before, and that was fascism, right? And that's that reactionary right-wing idea of this is this understanding of we have to preserve our family lineage, our race, our heritage, and their DNA. They fear that their way of life is under attack, and they're willing to resort to extreme measures to maintain that way of life for their kids. Literally the 14 words, and driven to a desire to just maintain their dominance and control. And then there's the left, and the left is this more collective approach, and this is focusing on a common good and the well-being. It's the species being, as Marx said. And it's facing, this is the thing, is a lot of these ideas on the far right and on the radical left don't work in practical the practical economic system because of the damage that has been done to it, because there is no controls to get the system back to where these ideas first came from, right? The way that socialism was first thought up of would not work today because there's been so much decay of neoliberalism has taken so much of a bite out of the things that government used to do to protect protect workers from corporations. And it's this, there's this idea of this like social democracy of like we can achieve all of this, but we just have to vote harder, right? And this is like you can't do that when you're facing a group of people who said they will do whatever, they'll do January 6th, right? They'll overthrow the government and they want to have a fascist revolution. So it's like you can't say, hey, we should just play by the rules when the other side is saying like we should overthrow the government and impose our theocratic like literally like the right of kings, bring that back. All right, like straight up fascism, right? And so how is it that the left needs to be the ones that are the ones that are using this system? They don't, right? Because as the situation gets so much worse, those avenues don't work. So more and more people go further to the left, just as more and more people go further to the right. So we're going to see these types of political battles more and more, where it's like a left wing candidate taking on a moderate, similar to Massa, or you know what I mean, the opposite of what I just said. But yeah, like there will always be the center versus the extremists, and it'll either be the right wings or the left wings. And the more and more that happens, hopefully what ends up happening is there becomes this class consciousness, so that the bourgeois isn't at a battle with itself, and that these things can be kind of the contradictions can be embodied through like an actual social movement. But I don't know how that's going to happen in this political climate, because it's like the right wing they have so much more energy because they're so much more willing to do and say the things that get the reactions that, right? And the left struggles to find a way forward because we're always trying to like battle with ourselves as far as like strategy and decorum and rhetoric. But the right wing does not care about any of that. They don't give a shit about any of those things, right? And so the left, while it's like the avenues become less and less possible to get to where they want to get to through electoral politics, it's the same thing on the right. So there's this political clash where the only way to get in is through like Livia Chow, like pretending to be on the left but actually being a full-on neoliberal politician, right? Pretend to be on the right but then actually be a full-on moderate, right? Like, and I mean, that's the thing though, right? Is it's similar, it's just as similar to this. People don't like Massa, but if you put him against a far-right lunatic like Milei, you're gonna vote for the status quo, right? Like, and that was a similar situation with Chow and what's her name, Bilal, where I voted GRU, so it didn't matter either way. I don't get drawn into. I understand the psychology of the lesser evil, but that's not how I vote. I vote whatever is the closest to my political alignment. That's how I vote. I don't get changed by the strategic voting because there's no point. I made a choice a long time ago that like your vote is not likely to actually count, period. And you should just accept that and just vote, endorse the party that is closest to your political alignment. I voted for the NDP once when Jill Andrew blocked me on Twitter because I couldn't vote for anybody else. There was no one further to the left of her. And it was like, well, I'm here. I'm not going to not vote. And I still voted for her. And yeah, that's what I'm not, it's like I'm not going to vote liberal just out of like spite because, yeah. Anyways. But the problem is the first past the post thing makes that even harder because, yeah. In a real democracy like in the Netherlands, where they had a proportional representation, you would vote, your vote goes into a pool, and then it's up for those representatives to create government, which guess what? You have to negotiate and you have to collective bargain. It's great. It's incredible. Great things happen when you force government to act to do what they are supposed to do, like negotiate. I voted liberal. I voted for Chrystia Freeland once. Pretty terrible, but it's true. I have no idea. I really hated Andrew Scheer. See, that's the thing though, because one, this is how I was more liberal minded then, and they were externalizing. Trudeau lost the popular vote that year. Going into the election, they were putting into the news that Scheer could win, that the Conservatives could win. They were leading in the polls. And that wasn't a lie because they won. The Conservatives won in the popular vote, but they lost through the electoral, through the parliamentary system. So when they say those things, it's true. And then it gets people like me to vote liberal, and I did. And from then on, I realized, this is a scam. They externalize these maniacs to keep the status quo in check, like to keep it so that you have no choice. And then what ends up happening is things like this, is where they do it enough, we get Trump. They do it enough, we get this guy. Because eventually it tips the scales and people are more willing to vote for a radical, and it ends up always being, when they go for a radical, it's someone on the right and not the left. All right, I'm trying to find some English content here. So Reuters is saying that Milei is ahead, but again, that's purely just exit polls skepticism, not official.
Sí, perdón,
Sí, Marcelo.
no, le quería aportar, ¿no?, una información que está